Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. So, Tara, you had asked me yesterday, should we talk about what's going on with Israel and Iran? And I wanted to say no, because I've purposely been ignoring it because it was stressing me out. But we need to talk about it because things are just heating up, and I think everyone needs to be aware of what's going on. So, the US unfortunately, I think is being pulled into it very quickly. And in my opinion, this is concerning that this could actually turn into a world war. Although we've thought that many times over the past couple of years, and we're fine, so we'll see. But just to give background on what's happening here, Israel launched what they're calling Operation Rising Lion around June 13th, and they targeted over 200 Iranian air defense, nuclear, missile, and military installations, and they ended up taking out 130 missile launchers, which is wild. Like some of them they took out as they were loading them. Like it's just crazy. So Iran responded with ballistic missile and drone strikes on Tel Aviv, Herzliya, and other cities, causing civilian casualties too. So there were, I think, over 24 in Israel and over 220 in Iran. I don't know the current numbers. This was as of yesterday. So the U.S. has deployed jets, a third Navy destroyer in the Mediterranean, plus a carrier strike group toward the Arabian Sea, but says it has not joined offensive strikes against Iran's nuclear sites. So I've been watching Truth Social to see what Trump is posting, and it's driving me crazy because he'll say something pretty big and then it'll be followed with a bunch of like just normal things. So one of the posts, he declared that the US has complete control over Iranian airspace. And this whole situation, I think part of the reason I didn't want to talk about it for the last few days is because I don't know what to think of it. It's my
Mhm.
mind is everywhere. Clearly, Iran is a threat. We know this. No one really disagrees with that. But at the same time, myself and I think most Americans have no appetite for war. And we've talked about this before, but it's like every time in the past that the US gets involved in a regime change, we make things worse. And I think that's the overall consensus from what I'm seeing on social media and just reading the comments. Pretty much everyone thinks we should just kind of stay out of it. But at the same time, no one wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So can we really stay out of it? And here's my thoughts with the whole nuclear weapon thing, because they've been saying this for years that Iran is just months or weeks away from a nuclear weapon. I clearly remember you and I talking about this like 2 years ago, and it was like they're 6 weeks away from a nuclear weapon, right?
Right.
And so I don't know that I can necessarily believe that, especially considering we invaded the Middle East under Bush because of like weapons of mass destruction that they never ended up finding. So it just seems to be like a convenient reason that no one can really argue with because nobody really knows for sure. But on TikTok, surprisingly, I've seen a ton of videos of Iranian people that I guess have fled um, previously, and they're all siding with Israel. They all, are explaining that the leaders in Iran are horrible and they're glad that Israel is taking them out. And while they don't necessarily trust Israel, they're miserable under this regime and they desperately want change. And I've heard some horrifying stories. I asked our GPT to just kind of give like an overview altogether of the Islamic Republic of Iran since they took over in 1979. And it said that they have executed as many as 20 to 30,000 Iranians since they took over, which is just absolutely insane. And you hear the individual stories, and it's just these people are horrific. But at the same time, like I said, I can speak for myself, but I think the majority of Americans really don't have an appetite for war. And I know I don't. And so this is where the conflict comes in my mind, and I just don't know what to think. So what are your thoughts on it?
I think we're in a very tricky situation because if Iran is getting closer to nuclear capabilities, we're fucked. Like, not just the US, the whole world has the potential to be fucked. And I also think Trump is kind of fucked in this situation because who does he believe? And like, what does he do? Who can he trust? When you look at it, there's really only two options, or three, I guess. Stay out of it altogether, try to negotiate, or go to war. But I don't see a way for America to stay out of this entirely. And I do wholeheartedly believe that Trump wants peace, but he also recognizes that if Iran is allowed to build up their nuclear capabilities, that's not going to be a good thing for America or for the rest of the world. And the question I have is who's telling the truth and who's telling lies? Because US intelligence is saying that Iran is years away from nuclear capability and at the closest, maybe months. And then you have Israeli intelligence saying, no, Iran is an imminent threat now. And after doing this podcast for the past 3 years and all of the shit that we've talked about and everything we've uncovered, I'm not necessarily inclined to believe anything that comes from US intelligence at this point, because we've seen time and again throughout history how the CIA and the deep state have created completely false narratives to institute these regime changes. And in doing so, they rally the American people to support foreign wars in an effort to keep the military industrial complex going. And I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes with the deep state and who the fuck is really in control. And I don't think Trump even knows. And I don't know if you listened to the interview that Tucker did with Jeffrey Sachs last week, but they were talking about the Russia-Ukraine war and why Trump hasn't been able to end it quickly like he said he would. What did he say? Like 2 days, I'd have the war over. And we're 6 months in. And Sachs was explaining that it's because the CIA and the deep state are working against Trump in Ukraine, and they're still aligned with the EU and the global agenda. So, yes, Trump is president, and, he has this executive power, I guess, to some extent, but he also has some great people in his cabinet. But at the same time, I think there's still an overwhelming majority of highly influential deep state government operatives who are working against him. So even if Trump is the world's greatest negotiator, if he doesn't have accurate information or the 100% backing of US intelligence, how is he going to make informed decisions about this war? Like, I think he's in a really shit position and he has to make some critical decisions. And we really have no idea if those decisions are going to be based on truth or lies.
Yeah, he really is in an impossible situation. And I mean, like you said, who can he trust? When so many people have turned on him in the past, there's really no telling. So, things started to really heat up on Monday, and Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, Iran should have signed the deal I told them to sign. What a shame and waste of human life. Simply stated, Iran could not have a nuclear weapon. He put that in all caps. I said it over and over again. Everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran. Then he leaves the G7 summit early. Then India gives the same warning about evacuating Tehran. So people were panicking and fleeing the city, and rightfully so. And then on the other side of it, China issued a warning for its citizens to leave Israel. And then on top of that, flight tracking data showed at least two Chinese cargo jets turned off their transponders mid-flight and redirected from China, flying over Central Asia and then disappearing from public trackers before landing inside Iran. So analysts say that these flights were likely carrying military or dual use supplies like missiles, drones, or electronics. And I don't know about you, but that has me worried, like really worried. And that's why I'm saying this could turn into a world war very quickly. Um, then, just after the Israeli airstrikes hit the Iranian targets, including the state broadcaster's own headquarters in Tehran, and by the way, when that happened, there was like live footage of it, like the news reporters talking and, they get hit. So that's going all over social media. So after that, the Iran state media posted this message. They said, quote, "Tonight, a great surprise will occur, one that the world will remember for centuries." So that was 2 nights ago, and there's been no confirmed event or official announcement that came out following that warning. So was it an empty threat? Was it just, psychological warfare? Is it a delayed strike? Or maybe it's just an internal tactic, messaging tactic to project power. I'm not sure. But it has everyone freaked out that's following this. And I'm sure that the fear mongering is only going to get worse in the coming days. But you know what's weird with that is that was 2 nights ago, right? Well, we had a massive whiteout in the Schumann resonance, followed by two blackouts, which is incredibly unusual. And like, it's basically for anyone that's not familiar with the Schumann resonance tracker, um, something like this is just it never really happens, and it signals massive rapid disturbances in the Earth's electromagnetic environment. And so I'm like, what the hell? It's like something happened energetically or something that the meters picked up on, but that we haven't seen. So weird coincidence, right? But I had to throw that in there because things are just escalating. There's a lot of intense energy right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I want to take a step back for a minute and just refresh everyone's memory about our recent history with Iran and what led to this point. So Trump pulled us out of the 2015 deal that Obama made. He said it was a disaster and it handed billions to a terror sponsoring regime with sunset clauses that would let Iran enrich uranium again. So he pulls us out of that. He ends up reimposing crippling sanctions on Iran's oil, banking, and shipping sectors. And then he authorized that strike on Soleimani, which was Iran's like top terrorist. Cyber ops targeted Iran's nuclear program covertly at that time without starting a war. So there were no new wars in his first term, no nuclear weapons developed in Iran, and Iran really did back down. They weren't making all the threats that they are now. As soon as Biden got into office, it was like one of the first things he did. He jumps right back into negotiations with Iran. I think it was early 2021. And he brought that same flawed deal back into play. And so, despite this diplomacy, Iran refused inspections and continued enrichment. And then I know we talked about this when it happened, but Biden allowed frozen Iranian funds to be released, including the $6 billion ransom in 2023 that was tied to that hostage deal via Qatar. And he stopped enforcing oil sanctions. So basically, like everything else, Biden fucked it up. And now Trump is left to deal with this absolute mess. So officially, what's being said is that by 2023, Iran was enriching uranium to 60%. And obviously, they increased attacks via all these proxy groups in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza. So Hamas, Hezbollah, all of those, they're getting their backing and their funding and everything else from Iran. So here we are. This is the situation that Trump is left to deal with, which again, it's like an impossible situation. So Trump posts on Truth Social, he reposts this old post from himself that said, quote, "I never got over the fact that Obama was able to send $1.7 billion cash to Iran and nobody in Congress, the FBI, or justice called for an investigation."
Yep.
So obviously we know why, they're all in bed with the military industrial complex. But that's why I'm so suspicious of everything happening because you really can't trust anyone. Like all of these people throughout our government, throughout the Israeli government, like you don't know who you can trust because they're all in bed with the military industrial complex. And that's just my opinion. But I also feel like Netanyahu is baiting Trump because he went on Fox News saying that Iran was behind the assassination attempts on Trump even though these claims haven't been verified and US intelligence hasn't publicly confirmed Iranian involvement and Iran, denies it. So I just don't trust it. And Netanyahu said on that Fox News report, quote, they want to kill him. He's enemy number one. He's a decisive leader. He took up this fake agreement and basically tore it up. He killed Qasem Soleimani. He's been very forceful. So for them, he's enemy number one. So again, I feel like he's really baiting Trump, playing to his emotions. You know, these guys are trying to kill you. So I want to play a clip of Netanyahu, and this was from an ABC News interview that he did. So listen to this.
So we gave it a chance. We've, clenched our teeth. We did everything we could to enable President Trump to negotiate the desired result, and that would have been preferable for us, and I think for everyone. But we saw in the course of the negotiations, while they were negotiating with the United States, the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, tweeted almost every day, "Death to Israel." The talks were merely a facade.
So are you going to target the supreme leader?
Look, we're doing what we need to do. I'm not going to get into the details.
But U.S. officials tell us that the president flatly rejected a plan, an opportunity that the Israelis had to take out the supreme leader. Do you understand his concern? My understanding is his concern is that this would escalate the conflict beyond where it is already.
No, it's not going to escalate the conflict. It's going to end the conflict.
Okay, so I don't know. What's your take on Netanyahu? Because I personally don't trust him. I think he will do anything to push the US into this war, including lying. But I don't know. That's just my opinion. What do you think?
I really don't know. Like, I read so many different things. One being that like 70% of people in Israel don't trust Netanyahu. And then at the same time, the way he's handling these Iran strikes has like an 80% approval rating from the people of Israel. And like even his political opponents are rallying behind him and supporting everything he's doing. And I think Trump knows that Israel is not going to back down in this war. And like, do we support our ally? Do we stay out of it? It's like, what the fuck do we do? And I think another question that we need to be asking is if, let's say, the US and Israel do work together to successfully defeat Iran and there is a regime change, what happens if that next regime is even worse than this one? Because we've seen that happen before and it was all orchestrated and coordinated by our own government.
Yeah, it's happened every time we've gotten involved, and then we end up in another 20-year or just endless war. And here's the thing, like we're already involved. You know, we're backing Israel and helping them, but we're not like directly in it. And I feel like Netanyahu is trying to pull us like full force directly in it. And the other thing that I think is so weird is we know the mainstream media, they will say anything to make Trump look bad. They're not doing that right now. They're like, you know, fully going along with him, which oddly enough, it
Which
makes
should
me
be a red
nervous.
flag. Right,
Yes.
exactly.
Just like you said with Netanyahu's political opponents are like rallying behind him. It's like, why? You know, like these aren't good people. They've obviously rallied behind Biden. So why are they? So the whole thing, I think it just goes to show we don't trust our government or the media or intelligence at all at this point. And that's why, I feel so worried about this. And I don't think I'm alone in that. So in that interview, the reporter points out Trump flat out said, we're not going to take out the supreme leader. And Netanyahu wants to take out the supreme leader because he's saying that that is going to end things. So then after that, yesterday, Trump posts this on Truth Social. He says, quote, we know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He is an easy target, but is safe there. We are not going to take him out, kill, at least not for now, but we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
His,
Like he's sending
his
out a
trademark
memo.
tagline.
Yeah. And so, it's like, again, he'll make a post like that. And then the next post will be about like absolutely nothing that's that important. So on TikTok, here's what I'm hearing, and I think we should all just kind of be aware of. Everyone is basically expecting a false flag attack here in the US that will then be blamed on Iran. And then that will get Americans on board with the US going to war with Iran. Because right now, nobody wants to go to war. But if something like that happens, kind of like how, 9/11 happened, and then everyone completely supported invading the Middle East, people are expecting like they're going to do something like that to get the American people on board because right now we're not on board. But then the flip side is there's also all these warnings of Iranian sleeper cells that came in over the past 4 years under Biden that are in our country already, just waiting for a signal to attack. So either way, it seems like everyone's on high alert, but I think for good reason. Like there definitely could be things happening.
Yeah, I definitely think for good reason. And I think this is also creating a big fracture in the MAGA movement because you have some really strong MAGA supporters who I think were pretty crucial in getting Trump elected. And they're now speaking out against US military involvement in this conflict. You've got Tucker Carlson, Charlie Kirk, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Steve Bannon, Thomas Massey. They're all speaking out about how this isn't our war and we shouldn't be involved. And we need to be focusing on issues within our own country and not overseas conflicts. And normally, I completely agree with this because that's what I've been saying about, the war in Ukraine for the last 3 years. And I'm trying to see both sides because I am such an outspoken supporter of the America First agenda. But if Iran truly is a threat to America, then we do need to get involved. So it's like I don't know the answer.
I don't know either, and I don't think that we will know exactly what's going on. I think that Trump has information that's classified intelligence that he can't speak publicly about. I do
But is
trust,
it accurate intelligence that
well,
he's
yeah,
getting?
I know that's the thing. Who knows? Well, I don't trust it. And I think that's why you have so many people in the MAGA movement speaking out about it. And you mentioned Tucker Carlson. I'm going to play this clip of him interviewing Ted Cruz about this because things got heated very fast. This was crazy. Let me play it.
I don't know the population. Oh, no, I don't know the population. You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple? But how many people live in Iran? 92 million. Okay. Yeah, how could you not know that? I don't sit around memorizing population tables. Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government. Why is it relevant whether it's because 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is that relevant? If you don't know anything about the country. I didn't say I don't know anything about. Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran? They are Persians and predominantly Shia. Okay, this is it's not even. You don't know anything about Iran. So okay, I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran. You're a senator who's calling for the. You're the one who claims. You're the one who claims about the country. No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump. You're the one who can't figure out if it was a good idea to kill General Soleimani, and you said it was bad. They're trying to murder Trump? Yes, I do. Because you're not calling for military strikes against them in retaliation. If you really believe that. Carrying out military strikes today. You said Israel was. Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're supporting them. Well, you're breaking news here because the U.S. government last night denied, the National Security Council spokesman Alex Pfeiffer denied on behalf of Trump that we were acting on Israel's behalf in any offensive capacity. We're not bombing them. Israel's bombing them. You just said we were. We are supporting Israel. You're a senator. If you're saying the United States government is at war with Iran right now, people are listening.
Oh my
Wow,
God.
I had not heard that.
I just heard it this morning and I was like, oh shit, that is really not good.
Yeah.
So yeah, like things, that's what's happening. The people are so divided on this just within the Republican Party, and no one trusts anyone, and for good reason. We've been fed so many lies.
But here's what makes this even worse is like our country is already so divided. Just internally with our own internal politics, it's a fucking shit show right now. And then you're throwing this into the mix that's going to fracture like even more. It's a scary thing to think about.
Yeah, no, it really is. And the other thing, that I think about too is like, what better way to destroy Trump's America First agenda
Right.
than a war that like involves pretty much everyone in the world? Because that's
Exactly.
where where this will head. So, okay, let's just go conspiracy for a minute because I have to get this out. You have to hear this, okay? Chris Bledsoe. I don't know if we talked about him before on the podcast or if you know who he is, Tara.
No idea.
Okay, so he's all over social media, um, in like the UFO UAP talks. So he had a 2023 memoir called UFO of God, where in that whole book, he's had contact with something. And this is like supposedly, confirmed by our government and everything. It's been a big deal in the UAP world. So he writes this book. He brings in government officials to see these UAPs that are like on his property, whatever. But in that book, he claims that a full-scale conflict between Israel and Iran would trigger the kickoff of World War III. And this was back in 2023 that the book came out, and it would usher in a massive UFO revelation. And so he said, like, this is what the UFO or UAP or whatever told him. And he claims the celestial alignment of the star Regulus rising before dawn in the gaze of the Sphinx, which is going to happen around Easter 2026, is a pivotal marker for world change. He says the Regulus Sphinx alignment signifies the end of the old way and the beginning of the new, again, around Easter of 2026. So I asked our GPT, like, is this guy credible? Has he actually worked with our government like he claims? And it said that in UFO of God, the book, the foreword is by Semivan. He's a former CIA operations chief. And here's what he put in the foreword. He said, Chris has probably been visited officially and unofficially by more government types and UFO researchers than any other contactee. And then on various podcasts like the Sean Ryan show, Chris Bledsoe says he gives all kinds of stories of interactions with the CIA, NASA, DIA, NRO, NSA, and Pentagon officials watching UFO related phenomena at his home. And so people are divided. A lot of people think he's the real deal. He does work with the government. And then other people think, well, if he works with the government, he's part of some big UFO like psyop and trying to like trick the American people. So take it with a grain of salt. But that is a little concerning because he was talking about this, before any of this conflict began and said that this would be the kickoff of World War III. So that got me thinking, wait a minute, like Iran is part of BRICS. So I asked our GPT, like, is it likely that the BRICS nations are going to step in and back Iran? And here's what it said. It said, yes, most BRICS nations would likely support Iran over Israel, especially if the US and NATO become visibly involved. The support would be diplomatic, economic, and possibly covert military, not boots on the ground, but enough to challenge Western dominance and embolden Iran. This isn't just about Israel versus Iran, it's about the East versus the West and who gets to write the next chapter of global power. So that's, again, like, I think whatever we do, whatever Trump decides to do, really could be a defining factor on how involved China gets and Russia and Brazil and India and all these other BRICS countries.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the scariest parts. And I also think that's why Trump is so adamant that Iran doesn't get nuclear weapons. And we've talked at length on this podcast about the rise of this basically like anti-Western access of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And they could essentially create like a whole anti-Western nuclear bloc that would escalate the arms race. And it wouldn't be like the Cold War because that was, just the Soviet Union and the US's rivals. We're talking about World War II level distribution of alliances between countries. This could extend across the Middle East, like result in increased terrorist attacks. Even if you just look at Iran's relationship with Russia right now, that should be concerning if Iran gets nuclear capability because the two countries are already cooperating with each other from a military standpoint. Iran has been supplying drones to Russia for using in Ukraine. Russia's been helping Iran develop satellites and missile tech. So who knows if that can turn into nuclear technology? And I think having Iran as a nuclear power would be an incredibly dangerous thing. And when it comes to negotiations, as good of a negotiator as I think Trump is, I don't think I trust that good faith negotiations would be upheld when you're dealing with a country like Iran. So there's
Right.
just so many factors here, and it's escalating so quickly. And like I don't know what to believe.
Well, and look at,
So
like you said earlier, the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine have
mhm.
gone nowhere, and they haven't been in good faith. And so why would we think it would be any different in this situation? It's an impossible situation.
Right, exactly. So I guess we'll just keep track of it and see how it escalates or hopefully de-escalates, but I doubt that. But anyway, let's switch gears to some domestic drama because there's plenty of shit going on in the US too. And I don't know if you paid attention to this on Monday, I think it was. Did you see what Kash Patel was saying about the Chinese? God, what was it? They got intel on a Chinese plot to interfere with the 2020 election, and the Biden admin covered it up, and now they have the proof of it.
Yes. I mean, I
Yeah.
haven't like looked into it, but I saw the headline and that made me think again, like China wanted Biden in here so that they could have open borders and start infiltrating the United States, like
Yeah.
bringing in all these men.
It's crazy because this was actually confirmed between June and August of 2020. Customs and Border Patrol officers at Chicago O'Hare International Airport intercepted almost 20,000 fake driver's licenses that were coming from China and Hong Kong. And they were addressed to multiple states, and they had the identities of real people like young voters, college students, and surprise, surprise, military age males. And they were very high quality fakes. They had like near perfect barcodes and holograms that would match, our US IDs. And at the time, they were thinking like, oh, maybe it was related to identity theft and underage drinking. But there were agents that were raising concerns about their use in mail-in ballot fraud in the 2020 election. So they shared these concerns with the FBI and the intelligence community. And what did the FBI do under Biden? They ordered the intelligence report to be destroyed, and they said it was unverified and politically sensitive. Now, anytime our FBI under Biden destroys information, it's because they're hiding the truth.
I mean, this is huge. This is like bigger than Watergate, bigger than any other scandal in modern history. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like a coup basically that's getting Biden in when Trump was supposed to be in.
It is just one more piece of the coup puzzle because there have been so many things that happened that we now have proof that shows it was a fucking stolen election.
But no one will be
So,
held accountable, so,
no, of course
whatever.
not. No. But I do want to point out something that I see as good news. I thought it was kind of awesome, but we'll see if it actually happens. So, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy made this announcement on Monday where he said the Department of Transportation is not going to be funding repairs for cities that are being damaged by the anti-ICE rioters. So he went on X and he said, quote, the US DOT will not fund rogue state actors who refuse to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. And to cities that stand by while rioters destroy transportation infrastructure, don't expect a red cent from DOT either. Follow the law or forfeit the funding, end quote. Stephanie, I think this is awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah, why the hell should they expect any money whatsoever when they are literally like trying to push away help to stop the chaos? They have to deal with the
Exactly.
consequences.
But what are they going to do instead? Of course, the left is going to say this is illegal, and they're going to file multiple lawsuits if Duffy does indeed follow through with this threat. But there is actually legal precedent for this under South Dakota versus Doyle in 1987, when the Supreme Court upheld that the federal government can withhold funds to pressure state compliance as long as the funds are related to the federal interest in a particular program and they're not being coercively extreme. So, of course, I'm sure the left will cry and whine that this is discriminatory against blue cities and it is extreme. So again, I'm sure multiple lawsuits would be coming. But the money is actually a pretty big issue because sanctuary cities like LA, Chicago, Portland, New York, San Francisco, Minneapolis, and Seattle, all these cities that are allowing anti-ICE protests and riots, these are all cities that rely very heavily on DOT grants for funding their ongoing infrastructure programs. Los Angeles alone could stand to lose $947 million in recently awarded federal transportation grants, including $710 million that was part of the bipartisan infrastructure law and fiscal year 2024 transportation bill that I guess was earmarked for part of the light rail in San Fernando Valley, 160 million in grants for street and transit improvements and traffic safety, and around 78 million that's supposed to go specifically to electric buses and chargers under the FTA's low emissions program. And mind you, this is all in addition to the 7 billion that California is currently demanding from the Trump admin to finish their epic fail high-speed rail system that we have talked about at length more than once on this podcast, that has already cost more than $100 billion instead of the projected $33 billion that it was supposed to be. And it's 5 years overdue and it's nowhere near completion. And then you've got similar funding projects going on in San Francisco to the tune of $829 million in federal grants for subway and train upgrades. Seattle has $30 million at stake to improve 12 intersections and add sidewalks, bike lanes, and landscaping. Chicago was granted something like $200 million for rail car replacement. And New York, there's like tens of millions of dollars in active DOT grants. So this is literally billions of dollars tied to DOT projects in sanctuary cities. And personally, my opinion is I think all of their funding should be absolutely pulled in any city that's actively interfering with federal immigration law and not allowing federal officers to do their job.
You know, I think it's weird in LA that they have all of these plans. We've talked about it at length on this podcast for their vision for a smart city, which was, I think, 2026, 2027. And, then they had like the wildfires that cleared a big portion. And now they have riots that are like, destroying small businesses that maybe weren't on board with this plan. And it just
And the
seems,
spa jail.
yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, do they want the city to burn to the ground because they have a plan in place to replace it already? So I think, yeah, if they're going to sit there and watch their city burn and do nothing, no, they shouldn't get funding. And the thing is, they're not going to just ask for the normal funding like they've always gotten. They're going to want more. Like you said, well, like 7 billion more for the railway. They're going to want another 7 billion to rebuild after all of these riots, burn everything to the ground.
Yeah, and I don't think this should just apply to DOT funding. I think any state that is outwardly defying federal immigration law
Yeah.
should be denied of all funding, whether it's
Hmm.
DOT funding or something else. Like if you aren't going to go along with the program, then you don't get funded. And I guess
Right.
that's authoritarian of me, but I really don't care. So, meanwhile,
I don't think
we
it's
also
authority. I
have,
think it's common sense.
yeah, thank you. We're going to go with that common sense. And then meanwhile, we have liberal politicians who are still pulling these theatrical stunts to get attention with the anti-ICE narrative. Just yesterday, we had New York City Comptroller Brad Lander, who conveniently is also running for mayor and likely trying to get attention. But he was taken into custody yesterday afternoon by ICE agents at a federal building in Lower Manhattan when he was trying to escort an allegedly illegal migrant out of an immigration court hearing. And I guess he was approached by ICE agents and he started arguing with them, repeatedly asking them for a judicial warrant. And he refused to step aside. So he was handcuffed and detained in the hallway. And yes, this is all on video. And I would play the clip, but there's so much noise in the background because he's yelling that ICE doesn't have the authority to arrest him because he's a US citizen and you can't arrest US citizens, asking for a judicial warrant. And then you have reporters shouting at ICE, demanding to know where they're taking him. And it's just a fucking shit show. So the DHS reported that Lander was arrested for assaulting law enforcement and impeding a federal officer. Assistant Secretary of the DHS, Tricia McLaughlin, who I am really starting to like her, by the way. Like, we've read several of her comments on this podcast, and I'm like really impressed with her. But she said nobody is above the law, and if you lay a hand on a law enforcement officer, you're going to face the consequences. And so this arrest is coming on the heels of Senator Alex Padilla's quote, disruptive political theater that resulted in him being handcuffed and forcibly removed from that DHS press conference in Los Angeles by Secret Service and FBI a few days ago. This was when he kept trying to interrupt the briefing to ask Kristi Noem questions about the ICE raids and protests. And then earlier in May, there was the incident with Rep. LaMonica Ivor at the ICE detention center in New Jersey. So, of course, the left is calling this fascism, thuggery, and abuse of power, and my classic favorite, a threat to democracy.
Even though if this were a Republican that's going and trying to interfere, or they would call that like January 6th, threat to democracy, they're domestic terrorists, lock them up and throw away the key. So it's just, you can't take them seriously. But you mentioned Kristi Noem. She was rushed to the hospital yesterday.
I saw that, yeah.
And then they weren't saying anything. I found one article late last night that said that they're hearing it was from an allergic reaction, but they're not really giving, much detail. So hopefully she's okay.
From
But
what I saw, she was with RFKJ and they were visiting some kind of biosafety lab that was shut down. And it was after visiting that lab that she ended up having to go to the hospital.
okay, well, that's a lot more concerning if she had an
Mhm.
allergic reaction after being at a bio lab. What the
Right?
hell? Okay, so
Yeah, I
that's
guess it's called the Integrated Research Facility at Fort Detrick, and it studies viruses causing high consequence disease such as Ebola and SARS-CoV-2, according to its site. And one of its focus areas is to, quote, mitigate major public health events related to emerging or re-emerging infectious diseases or biological weapon attacks.
okay.
So,
We'll be following that story to see what comes out. That makes it a lot more concerning. I hope she's okay.
yeah, exactly.
But speaking of the whole political theater, remember the quote unquote Maryland dad that his name was Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and he was like the poster boy for the whole anti-ICE movement. And back when that all started, Senator Chris Van Hollen and a few other Democrats went all the way to El Salvador to stand up for this poor Maryland dad.
Oh, I
Well,
remember.
yeah. So this guy was like the face of this whole movement that are sparking all these protests, right? Well, last week he had a criminal hearing in Tennessee for two felony accounts. One was conspiracy to transport undocumented immigrants for financial gain, and the other was unlawful transportation of illegal aliens for financial gain. Not a single Democrat showed up for that hearing, nor did they fund his defense. You would think they would have all their big attorneys come in. Nope, he has public defenders. So the guy who the mainstream media and Democrats have been cheering on for weeks nonstop, none of them showed up. None of them were present at his hearing. Why? Because it's highlighting the fact that he is a criminal and they know they can't defend that. So he had 9 people in his vehicle, most of which were illegal migrants, including a 15-year-old boy. And by the way, they don't know where that boy is or if he's okay. All they know was at the time he was in the car. So basically, this guy was involved in human trafficking. And he now faces 10 years for each illegal that he transported and a $250,000 fine. And then during this arraignment, multiple new allegations were brought up. A Homeland Security agent testified that multiple accomplices said Garcia asked a 15-year-old girl for nude photos on Snapchat and that he used his own children as human shields against police. So remember, the left touted this guy as a Maryland father. What kind of father uses his own children as a shield? And on top of that, we know he has a history of domestic violence as well. So, a horrible criminal that is here in this country illegally was the poster boy for the left's attack on Trump's deportation policies. That's who the left stands for. And it's absolutely disgusting. And that's why they didn't show up to this hearing, because they know it'll make them look really bad.
Yeah, because they can't defend it. How could you possibly defend any of that?
No,
It's
you
a
can't.
fucking no, exactly. So, okay, we got to talk about my favorite shit show, California, because this just came up yesterday and I want to know your opinion on this. So, state lawmakers just announced a new proposed law called the No Secret Police Act. This is Senate Bill 627, and what this would do would be prohibit law enforcement officers from wearing masks in public. So, California lawmakers and immigrant advocates are arguing that quote unquote anonymous enforcement erodes transparency, undermines police accountability, and creates fear in communities because everyone's afraid of, people in masks. This, of
Even though
course,
they were the
isn't
ones that mandated masks all throughout COVID.
right, right. The irony, right? Yeah. And this, of course, is in response to the media coverage of all the undercover and masked law enforcement and ICE agents that were using unmarked vehicles during the riots and the protests in LA and San Francisco and San Diego. So, which are still ongoing, by the way. And this bill is being sponsored by Democrat State Senators Scott Wiener and Jesse Arreguin. And Wiener told the press yesterday, he said, quote, "This is a very important and timely proposal to deal with the fact that we're seeing more and more law enforcement officers, particularly at the federal level, in our community, covering their faces entirely, not identifying themselves at all, at times even wearing army fatigues. You can't tell if these are law enforcement officers or a vigilante militia. Now is the time for California to act and to protect our communities. We do not need secret police in California," end quote. Stephanie, it's the level of hypocrisy as usual with the left. Like, it's perfectly fine for actual vigilante militia, violent thugs, and even quote unquote peaceful protesters to cover their faces in masks, but it's not okay for the police.
Maybe if they weren't allowing it to be a war zone, they wouldn't have to cover their face. But when people are lighting things on fire and spitting and all kinds of things, maybe they feel like they have to protect their face. Like maybe we should stop the war zone that's happening first and worry about the masks after.
Yeah, and it's even worse than that because specifically what this law would do is it would make it a misdemeanor offense for any local, state, or federal law enforcement officers in California who covers their face while performing official duties. It would also require all officers to wear visible identification and uniforms with their name or badge clearly displayed. There are exemptions for SWAT teams, National Guard, disaster responders, and wearing medical masks for safety, like if it's a wildfire or a pandemic. But I did some research on this, and especially because I worked undercover for so long, there's no mention of any exemptions for undercover operations like narcotics or vice assignments, which would clearly defeat the purpose of even having those units in the first place because you can't be identified as a police officer and do undercover work. So what's interesting here is the rationale that's coming from DHS Assistant Secretary McLaughlin, because she said that Wiener's description of federal officers as secret police is despicable and is contributing to an escalation of violence against them. And we talked about that last week, that there's been a 413% increase in assaults on ICE officers over the past couple months. And she said, quote, while ICE officers are being assaulted by rioters and having rocks and Molotov cocktails thrown at them, a sanctuary politician is trying to outlaw officers wearing masks to protect themselves from being doxxed and targeted by suspected terrorist sympathizers, end quote. And I think that is one of the biggest dangers is the fucking doxing that's going on because we've already seen that happening. And it doesn't just happen to federal law enforcement, it happens to regular law enforcement. It happens to anyone who speaks out that the left doesn't like. They get doxxed, their family gets threatened. And so, fuck yeah, they have a right to protect themselves. And I haven't seen any kind of official responses from California law enforcement agencies yet. But reportedly, the California Police Chiefs Association has been engaged in talks with Weiner and Arguin. And I guess they're taking like the politically correct stance, of course, it's California, of emphasizing the need to balance transparency with officer safety. But this bill is being fast tracked for committee hearings within the next couple weeks. And I just hope that there are departments out there with balls that will speak out, like the DHS, and actually put officer safety first.
I just think it's crazy that this is what they're spending their time on. They're spending their
Right.
time fast tracking a bill about masks while there's riots and chaos everywhere. And it just highlights the left is the party that is pro-criminal and anti-law enforcement. The right is the party of law and order. And I mean, how much more do they need to do to make that crystal clear? It's absolutely disgusting. And again, it's why at the federal level we shouldn't be supporting that. Like it's if you're going to allow chaos in your state, you're on your own. And I just feel so bad for all of the law enforcement and federal officers that have to deal with this kind of bullshit.
Yeah. And fortunately, I don't think California can really have any control over what federal officers do. I don't see how they can enforce this on the federal government.
Right.
But for any of the law enforcement agencies in California, like I really hope they stand up for themselves because this is bullshit.
And it's probably coming from people that have no education or experience of law enforcement. Like they're just
Yeah, of
throwing this
course.
together. And are they bringing law enforcement in to talk about why they need to wear a mask and cover their face? No, they don't care because they care about the criminals. They don't care about law enforcement. And, it's the same thing we've been seeing for years now. And it's unbelievable that anyone's still voting for these people. Maybe that'll change soon. Who knows? Okay, well that's a lot going on. We will keep tracking everything and we'll see everyone back here on Friday. So thanks for tuning in and have a great day.